And we're back.
Yeah, it's the next day. I'm so tired.
Yeah, I'm also tired.
None of us have slept in that entire 24-hour period.
That's not true.
We're still in the bunker.
They won't let us out.
They won't. They won't.
Well, what would you like to hit first?
Talked about Bridge 4 generally, so it might make sense to start with the stuff we wanted to say about the other Bridge 4 members. Because we didn't really get into that at all, but like just the cast of other people on Bridge 4, the people that, the stakes, the people Kaladin is trying so hard to protect. So, Graham, you wrote down Moash, Sigzil, and Rock. I take great issue that you did not also write down Teft. He is equally worthy as a member of Bridge 4.
Oh yeah, he's very important.
But also, there's not a lot to say about him in this book other than just, like, I think he's the first person Kaladin gets on his side, but also, you know, he's the one who kind of knows what's going on with Radiance just from his mysterious background that I don't think we get a lot of detail for.
No, we know that he's a spearman.
Or, like, he was formerly a spearman in, like,
yeah.
I guess I don't think they say exactly, but I assume must be Sadius's army. Yeah, so, I mean, he's just the grouchy old mentor figure at this point.
Yeah.
He kicks Kaladin into action a couple times. He's a former sergeant. I love him to death, but there's not a lot of super important stuff to say about him.
Yeah, he clearly has some sort of backstory and also some reason for disliking himself. Seems to be key to his character. Apart from that, we don't really get any particular details. Like
we talked about yesterday, he got enough characterization that you know he's going to survive for at least for at least a little while, so we can get the reveal of his backstory. But the interesting ones to talk about are, well, there's Sigzil, there's a lot of foreigners in Bridge 4, like foreign to Alethkar, and they're kind of like part of our access out to, like, they're actually a big source of us coming to learn about the wider world, at least some of the culture and like the way the cultures are framed. Another good example is Lopin. He should be on that list as well. But no, it's like Bridge 4 kind of becomes like we talked about Shallan being like explicitly like racist and discriminatory, like at least voicing those discriminations a lot more. Bridge 4 kind of acts as like the tavern in this book of just like, yeah, we got Sigzil, who's Azish, which is like a distant country, which all the people from that area are like skin, like in terms of racial features, what we'd call like African. Sigzil is also the one that apparently already knows Wit from he was Wit's apprentice as a world singer for a little bit, Wit or Hoyd. Not that Sigzil seems to know anything about like Hoyd being this big world hopping crazy guy. Just at some point spent some time with him, learning to be a world singer.
And Sigzil noticeably doesn't talk about it.
Oh yeah, he's notably very like, I don't want to talk about it. There's also the Lopin, who's Herdazian. He shows up, he's one-armed. I think pretty much everyone thinks of Herdazians as Hispanic in terms of like racial coding. The interesting one, which I know we have an email talking about, is Rock, which that's not his actual name. That's the name he tells people to call him because they're incapable of pronouncing, or his actual name is very long and they would have a hard time pronouncing it. And Graham, I know you've been practicing saying the name.
It's not that hard. Numu Hukumaki Aki Aya Lunamor.
That one's pretty fun because apparently it's a poem. Like that's the old names for horn eaters or ukalaki are poems. And so he was just like, yeah, mine's a poem of a really nice rock my dad found on the day I was born. Like a really pretty rock. So you guys can just call me Rock.
Part of the reason I want to talk about Bridge 4 is it's so close to what I want from Sanderson. In terms of, I really want something as simple as people hanging out in his world. Like the first chapter of Chasm Duty that we get is so close, and it just barely misses the mark for me. This is where they start to become friends, like just as a unit. It's the first time that Dunny ever speaks to Teft and Rock, who are already friends. We get the implication that there's a conversation that happens, but it doesn't really go more than like a page, and then we just get told the rest of it happens. And I'm like, no, let me see it. Like, I want to see them becoming friends. That's one of the things that I'm missing from this. And the same is true of the stew that happened afterwards. Like, if we got a description of Rock's food, if we got an idea of what song Dunny was singing, if we got the descriptions of these little cultural things, this cultural material, that's what would really sort of elevate Sanderson to a place where he would probably be one of my favorite authors.
It's kind of like we were talking about how, or Taylor, you made a lot of points about how there's a lot of, he's held up as this, he does a lot of world building, and he does do a lot of world building. He comes up with a lot of unique cultures and stuff, but then he doesn't seem to often engage with his own world building beyond like a surface level. Like, we're told, here's this Bridge 4 members who all have their different cultures, and I think we get a decent amount of like an idea of like Rock's culture, like at least like that's actually like dug into and given like some flavor and dimension and all that stuff. But like you said, like we don't actually hear the song, we don't hear what kind of things they talk about. The most we ever get about like the different types of cultures is like there's a conversation where Sigzil is talking about how, yeah, everyone believes in different gods. Like it talks about like the difference in religion, how they all have a different relationship with the heralds. Like the Alethi see them as essentially saints, but then other cultures see them as gods, or not as gods at all, or like only one of the heralds is a god. Like, so the most we get in terms of like really differentiating the cultures beyond Rock is explaining their relationship to the important plot relevant world building.
Yeah. Like, to expand on that point a little bit, it's sort of like everything has to fold back into the main narrative. And because of that, I also feel like the interludes suffer a little bit. Because each time that we got to an interlude, I was first excited because you were right. You were like, "Oh, Graham, you're probably going to like the interludes. There's finally going to be characters on Roshar who aren't main characters." But then, as I sort of read them, I was like, "I feel like all of these characters are set up for something that's paying off." Like, one of the interludes just is set up for the Night Watcher, so Dalinar doesn't have to explain to us what the Night Watcher is. Another one, it's like Risen, or however you say her name. I bet she's coming back. I bet she's an important character somehow.
Oh,
like don't tell me. I don't want to know. Like it's a lot of things where it's like
it's all.
I feel like
the first time reading the books, the interludes very much feel like they're just a thing that's filling out the shape of the world, and they do that. Which, I mean, it's interesting to talk about because you're right that everything Brandon writes is a setup to some payoff, or at least becomes a setup to some payoff, even if he didn't initially intend it to be. The world building's very functional to the plot, and that kind of ties into what we were talking about with the Wheel of Time episode, where it almost feels like there's no room for like fan fiction, why there's probably not like a really, really, but like it's kind of harder to imagine like fan engagement with the world or like how you would play an RPG in this world or whatever, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's like, because like, you know, there are plenty of books that like everything that happens is just the plot or like relevant to the plot, but those are much shorter books that aren't held up for their like held up specifically for their world building.
This book is way too long for every single word to not pay off to some other thing.
Well, it's so long, but also, like, you could cut 300 pages, and if you insist on it being 1,000 pages long, you could make that 300 pages you're cutting do proper work. I also can't help but wish the scale was smaller because of this, because the scale is big. I think about something, like, which is very similar to this book, which is something like Fondalee's The Greenbone Saga, and the scale is very big in that, but it's still ultimately human. And on Roshar and in the Cosmere, the conflict will never be any smaller than divine. And because of that, any story smaller than cosmically significant feels out of place.
I feel like you're taking from what you know about the rest of Stormlight. We don't get, well, I guess we get that in the sense that, okay, I guess the prelude references a divine conflict, and then there's the constant visions going like the final desolation comes. But the scale, but like, that is set up for later, but just this book, just Way of Kings, the scale is this one battlefield.
Yes, but like there's this implication that something else is going on here. And again, this is part of what I like about Bridge 4 and what I like about this book is, for a while, the conflict does feel like small enough, but by the end, our main character is a radiant. He's a special boy, and Dalinar is there to unite them. And, you know, not all of this is bad, but again, I just wish it was a little smaller and a little more human.
Yeah, I'm with Graham on this one. It kind of seems like we are following the most important people to the gods, and that almost makes them less special because I don't know. I wish they were just special in and of themselves instead of like, oh, actually they were all like divinely ordained.
I need to push back on that because they're not divinely, at least like Kaladin. That's actually a big thing Brandon Sanderson was really big on. Kaladin is not some like chosen hero. He doesn't have some secret ancestry where he's like actually the prince returned. Kaladin is just some random farm boy. Like he really is. Like he has like more education than not. Like the thing that made him special was he got chosen by like a spren, but that's like got chosen for him. So I feel like trying to frame this as some kind of like Kaladin is like the specialist boy divinely ordained, like, but he's not. I don't get where the he's divinely ordained thing is coming from, because
I mean, he receives a message from God and gets magic powers. Regardless of whether or not he's picked out by the narrative or he's not like a chosen prince or anything like that, he's still deemed special. Like, he's called Kaladin Stormblessed. He's called blessed by this god that we talk about.
Well, he's called that because of his reputation he gains through like what he does. Like to me, calling this like he's like the specialist boy is, or like this is some kind of divine ordained, is saying like any story where you follow a character that does something cool. Oh, now he's a specialist boy because he did something cool, because he achieved something.
I'm saying he's divinely ordained because this book believes in the power of God, and it believes in the power of prayer. I mean, we get that section at the end where Navani talks about creation, and creation is an act of prayer. That's probably the most like close to Sanderson writing his own thoughts we've gotten in this book, and the prayer works.
Well, I was going to say also that this book relies a lot on prophecy. I think if there was no prophetic stuff, that Kaladin would probably seem more like just a farm boy who got picked. But the fact that there's all these like death rattles that are like, the chosen one will come, and he's like, you need to find a champion. Like, to me, that seems like there's some strings that are being pulled. Like, this is kind of like the perfect, like all these building blocks are falling into place in a way that one person, one fighter, Kaladin, could not have, like, there's a dance going on that's far bigger than Kaladin, and he's just a dancer. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's the scale.
Maybe. I think I'm just kind of against the whole idea of this book of like Kaladin being a chosen one, because I think the interesting part of him is that he like really isn't a chosen one. Kaladin's story is like he became special, but he wasn't like born special, and like we're not just following the people that were born special. We're following the people that became special.
Yeah, again, I don't think it's necessarily born special, but he is still divinely chosen. At least. Because, I mean, I don't know what the Spren are, but on some level they have to be connected to whatever gods are here on Roshar, or maybe they're not, I don't know. But it feels that way. Like, it feels like the Spren are unique to Roshar in a way that, like, things we saw in Scadrial are unique to Scadrial. It's just like, this seems connected to whatever divine is here.
Well, isn't it? I mean, I remember last when we were talking about Warbreaker, you were talking a lot about how you were really into the type of story, like the whole like, you know, sword choosing the person that's pure of heart. Like that was the type of plot beat you were always like really into, like the.
Well, kind of. I mean, that's a tweet that I like, and it's like funny because it's pithy, but the actual nuances of what I am looking for in a book is obviously more complex. And, like, again, this is... And maybe it's not his intention, but it does feel like Kaladin is in some way chosen. Again, he's called Stormblessed. And I know that is a reflection of his skill, but in some way it also feels like
he might have chosen Honor first, but Honor did also choose him back.
Yeah.
True. Yeah.
Well, I was gonna say, like, Dalinar's there for a reason. Like, Dalinar chooses Honor and doesn't have an Honor spren, so, like, there's a certain level of, like... I think what Graham was trying to say is that the layer of having something on top of it that has, like, that's, like, at the god level takes away from the story for Graham. Like, the story itself is really good, and Kaladin itself is really good, but then having the Almighty say that, like, oh, we need to, like, I'm, like, putting together the God Squad, that's, like, that takes away from the story. Like, Kaladin, if Kaladin had this, like, obviously Kaladin's the main character, obviously he's doing all this stuff for himself, and obviously, like, yeah, he's, like, putting together Bridge 4, and he is an exception, and that's why we're following the exception. That in and of itself is not the problem. I think the problem that Graham was trying to say is that there's, like, this, on top of all of that, there's, like, this really, really high-level stuff going on with these gods who have this war, and that the idea that is even there in the first book takes away from what's happening, where it feels like that is something that should be mentioned in the second book and beyond, that really expands the world, because now we're too far back from just, like, right from the beginning.
What we're saying is that kind of similar to what happened in Mistborn, it makes a lot of what the main characters are doing feel less important, because we know that it's just a small part of this big divine battle going on.
Yeah,
like,
that's, I think, why...
Which I know that's the impression we get of, and, like, I agree that, like, I agree with that distinction. I know that's the impression we're getting from Way of Kings. I do want to make clear, because I know this for certain, the book does not actually explicitly tell us that Kaladin is the part of this big divine thing. We don't actually know that. We're assuming that based on, like, I guess, tone, like, against, like, tone and themes and stuff. But as far as what's actually been said in this book, yes, like, a Spren chose him, but we don't have any information to say that Spren choosing him was at all part of this bigger, like, what Honor is doing. Like, Honor is very clearly involving Dalinar. Like, Honor is very clearly involving... that's... Dalinar's obviously... He's being chosen by God to be part of this Unite thing. But Kaladin's being chosen by this random Spren. Like, this random little spirit of which there's, like, thousands of.
Yeah. I guess it's not explicitly said, but to use your own words against you, like, this is the main character.
Yeah.
Doesn't take a genius to put two and two together.
Again, he does receive a message from the Stormfather. That's true.
Yeah.
And, like, the Stormfather does more than Honor can do for Dalinar, because Honor can only send Dalinar pre-recorded messages. The Stormfather answers a question for Kaladin.
I'd argue that happened because Kaladin has distinguished himself by, like, bonding to Spren, so it's, like, put himself on the radar.
The radar of who? Of God.
Yeah. Again, it's not entirely either or, because, again, Sanderson fundamentally believes in agency for his characters, but he also fundamentally believes in, like, gods with a plan and the fact that prayer works. He's deeply religious. So it's probably not entirely either or. I do think it's worth bringing up that, again, only he could have done this, and that's fine. Like, again, as you said, it's a narrative.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I think we talked about this to its end. Do you get to talk about Navani now?
Sure.
Yeah. Gavilar, the king that was assassinated's wife, mother of Yasna and Elokar, shows up at the war camp and Dalinar, and has a interesting relationship series of exchanges with Dalinar.
I do think she's very funny, at least in the early interactions. I do like the fact that she's unapologetically horny for Dalinar. It's so weird to see this in Sanderson's work, of, like, just someone express desire, like, that intensely in a way that doesn't feel teenaged.
Yeah, like, she shows up at the war camps. She clearly she's like, hey, I was like bored just being in the capital city this whole time. I didn't have anything to do. All the cool stuff's here. And also, Dalinar, like, I'm interested in you. And there's a background here that it's not outright. It's not. I think it's not outright stated until like later on, but it's very much like apparently in their youth, Dalinar and his brother like kind of fought over Navani, and Navani chose his brother.
No, it's there pretty early.
Yeah, that's like in the first chapter.
That's the first time she appears that Dalinar like talks about the fact that I think he uses the expression of like he had desired her for years or something like that.
Yeah, and now Dalinar is being very like, you're my sister, you're effectively my sister, so it would be inappropriate to do anything. I'm going to avoid the shit out of you, in a very, very like pushing her away. He thinks of her as like a snake, like as like I'm just gonna get hurt if I get too close to her, or like she like makes it like I can't think clearly when she's around, and some really like kind of gross lines of thinking about her until eventually she traps him in a room alone with her, and like she opens up like in a really vulnerable thing about the way he's hurting her by pushing her away, like she thinks he hates her, and then they make out.
I can't. Sanderson strikes again at being dog awful at romance. Like, truly heinous. I like that chapter finished, the one where she like confesses her feelings, and I like threw up in my mouth. I was like, what is this? This is so bad.
Oh, where she confesses, where she's like, I feel like I'm like not allowed anywhere because like people just see me as the queen's widow or as the king's widow, like I can't be myself. Like that chapter.
I was like, oh my gosh, she finally is like a person and not just like a horny pair of tits that like makes Dalinar seem desirable. And then she gets like this cool characterization where like she's like, oh, I'm like a widow and like nobody wants me and like I'm really lonely. And I was like, oh, that's cool. And then he just kisses her and I was like, dog, you got nothing to say? Use your words. Damn. That's not romantic to me at all. I would be like, why'd you kiss me? Like, can we have a conversation?
It's like I just opened up to you about these like really deep, vulnerable feelings, and yeah, kissing makes me feel better.
Like he never actually told her that he like understands what she's going through. He just like was like, oh my god, there's strong emotions here. I don't know what to say, so I'm just gonna think with my dick and I'm gonna kiss her. Like that's what I read it as. I was like, this is really bad. Like this is not
yeah,
cute.
Yeah.
Navani is the thing about her. Like you say, it's cool that she's like unapologetically horny, but like that make like that's her only characterization. She's like flat. She's a flat character that has no other thing going on for her. Like there's like some points where she kind of is like very like matronly to Adeline, so there's like kind of that aspect, but that's like the way that she's matronly to Adeline is like makes like is like through Dalinar's lens, so it kind of just makes her like she's like matronly in like a horny way, like she like it makes her more desirable to Dalinar. Like it's not like matronly for matronly's sake. Like it's like
she only gets like proper characterization after she and Dalinar are already an item. And
yeah,
like it does feel like there should have been there's a missing beat, or maybe let's say like 3 of connective tissue before that happens.
I wish we had a chapter where she was just an engineer for no horny purposes. She just got to be smart and she didn't have to do it to be horny. Like,
or I think something that might work is we only get her interiority when we at the very beginning of chapter 69, which is Justice. We only get her interiority there. I feel like we could have gotten it way earlier in one of the books. Like what's the name for the like the weird payphone thing that they can write on?
Oh, span read.
Span reads?
Yeah, the span read. Which, like, I like the span read. Great, like, narrative device. I love that Sanderson was like, I need a way to put a payphone into my books. It totally works. It's a great.
I love Fabrial technology. I love the way and we'll get to the technology bit in a bit, but I love the way they do technology in this book.
One of the things that I think would have been useful is beyond Navani just being like, oh, by the way, I miss you, Yasna. One, she should be doing the scribing there. We don't need one of Dalinar's unnamed, like, attendants.
It was Adeline's thing.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be her. It could have been Navani. And also, if you had done that scene from Navani's point of view, we'd be sort of getting interesting interiority about her. And also the fact that we have the understanding that women have a second language that they don't talk about. Because there's always the message that they're writing, and then there's the postscript, which is in a different symbology that only she can read.
I don't think it's ever said it's literally in a different symbology. I think it's just said that it's an understanding among women that they don't read that part out loud. It's just like the undertext, they don't, when they're reading books to men, they don't read the undertext. That's just for the women.
And I just think about, like, well, we could get the additional thing that Yasna might be saying from her perspective, that sort of thing.
True.
Just all these different things. And also, like, she's already at the camps, just, like, make use of her.
Yeah, and it's like, it's not like back in Warbreaker where Brandon Sanderson was being incredibly strict about his, like, mode of writing, where it's like, oh yeah, these are the three perspectives and I have to jump between them. He's shown in this book that he's, you mean Elantris or Elantris, too many books. He's shown that he's more than willing to, like, spend half a chapter just being in someone else's head for when it makes sense, like doing perspective shifting. So, like, it wouldn't even be out of place to have, like, half a chapter where we're in Navani's head.
Yeah, and I think that would have helped show us how lonely she is, and that would have brought a new characterization to her, because honestly, I think that the fact that she pursues Dalinar so hard, and Dalinar repeatedly says that he's not interested, I think that's a blow to her credibility. Like, it kind of shows that she's, to me, it reads like I read her as someone who's dumb and, like, can't read the room. And, like, and it's only revealed, like, after they kiss that I guess she was reading the room correctly or something. Like, from Dalinar's perspective, she didn't seem that smart. And I, like, wanted, like, and so, like, she seemed just horny. And, like, she wasn't actually, like, putting any thought into, like, his feelings. And she was kind of, like, it discredited her as, like, a player in the game.
I'm really glad, Graham, you said this so early, but the whole, like articulated the whole, like, everything has to be a reveal, because I feel like that could be used to describe so many of the shortfalls that we're kind of running into. It's like Navani's her true motive had to be a reveal, like that she's, like, really desperately lonely and feels like all of the people she loved have, like, left her, like, because until then, the only perspective we have on her is Dalinar sees her as this incredibly conniving, politically savvy woman that, like, makes things complicated. So it's a reveal when it turns out, no, these are, like, genuine vulnerable feelings that she's, like, experiencing and, like, wants someone to connect with over them. That had to be a reveal.
Yeah, that should have been, like, that should have been her first characterization right off the bat. Like, then we build from there.
See, imagine one of the later Dalinar scenes where he's, like, really, like, trying to make sure there's a chaperone, make sure the door's opening so the guards can see them, all this stuff. And we're doing that, and that scene is happening when we, the audience, know Navani's true motivation. Like, the scene's completely the same, except we also know, because we had a Navani chapter earlier, or Navani section earlier, we also know what her actual, like, motivation desire is. That would be, it's kind of like, Graham, what you were saying with leaving the specifics of Kaladin's backstory until, like, a reveal later. Like, it would have been way more interesting if there was more for him to, like, dwell on and really think about, rather than having to just think, like, on repeat, my brother's dead, like, and not giving us any more detail. Like, my brother's dead, I was betrayed by Light Eyes.
since I've had 24 hours, I've come around to Taylor and your point about how the Tien reveal should be where it is, but everything else, I'm sort of like, I don't know. I kind of just want Kaladin thinking about that. We don't need a. What's frustrating is I would much rather have Kaladin thinking about what Liren has to say than us seeing a flashback and just seeing what a kind of guy Liren is. Like seeing Liren through Kaladin's point of view, not as a child, but now as an adult, I would think is much more interesting. And like not even in a I want him to go talk to his dad now, who is presumably still alive. I would just want him to I would just want him to think about it now as an adult. Like as an adult, you think about your parents differently than you did as a kid. It's sort of one of those things where it's like,
Kaladin's like 20, I think.
Yeah, Kaladin's like 20, so he's but I mean that's Roshar time, so of course he's like 22.
No, it's he's 19 in Roshar time and 20 in Earth time is what it is, like 21.
Are you sure about that?
They explicitly say he's 19
he was
in
19.
the text of this book. Like they say he's 19.
I think we should just treat him like he's 19. I don't really think that it matters. I think we should drop the whole who cared like about the Roshar time. I think we should just drop that. We should call.
I mean, I agree with 19. Taylor. It's
we should
bad.
Call Shallan 17. We should call Dalinar in his 50s. Like, let's just let it go. So we were talking about Navani though, and we brought up Kaladin as a point for Navani. So let's. I thought that Navani was the one who. I thought Navani had powers in the beginning, and I thought she was the one who deleted the old wife from Dalinar's brain.
Oh.
I thought she was like a sorceress who was deleted. She's like, I want him from himself.
No.
Delete the wife.
That'd be interesting. That'd be an interesting reveal, but no, unfortunately. I forget you. Just so I don't accidentally spoil anything. This book implies why Dalinar doesn't remember, right?
The book implies that it's his curse from the Night Watcher.
Yeah, there was definitely a time where we knew about the Night Watcher. We knew that about the wife, and I said, oh my god, is it the curse or the boon that he forgot his wife? I'm falling on the part where it's the curse, but there's a part of me who's like, wouldn't it be interesting if that was the boon? Like, that's what he went for? Like, that would be really cool.
Like, he doesn't remember his wife, but it turns out that, like, his wife was, like, horrible, and he wanted to forget her so that he doesn't think about it. Now he just assumes it was fine.
Yeah, like I guess it depends on whatever his boon / whatever the opposite side was, because because we don't know that. We only know one side.
He gets questioned by like Renarin and his other family members because they think it might have to do something with his visions, and he doesn't tell us, but he just very clearly states, "I know what my boon is. I know what my curse is. It's not this. Drop it. Like, this is personal. Leave me alone."
I still think there's a world where forgetting his wife is actually the boon.
Okay, interesting. Put that on the prediction list.
That is on my prediction list, and that's why I brought it up.
But yeah, Navani has so little to do in this book, and the view we get of her is so bad, and then the reveal that she's actually like a good person is so like sudden and late in a reveal that it just doesn't feel. Because even when we get the reveal that, like, actually she's, like, really sympathetic, it's still, like, well, now now that's an asterisk to this characterization I've now gotten of her throughout this whole book. Like,
yeah, it seems like, it seems disrespectful, honestly. Like, there's not that many women in this book, and then, like, she has all this cool characterization that you're gonna, like, leave as a reveal because why? Because you didn't have any other plans for her? Like, you're a creative writer. Just come up with something, dude.
I think I once again, thank you, Graham, for bringing up the leave everything as a reveal, because I really think it can be drawn to as the source of a lot of some of the odd structure of this book is just the like, well, because you're right. I think it would have been more interesting if we had those scenes between Dalinar and Navani, and there's the dramatic irony element of we know the true thoughts of both sides, and we're watching them fail to communicate. Yeah, we're watching the back and forth of them. I think that would have been so much more interesting.
Instead of this just like foxy, conniving woman trying to snake her way into Dalinar's bed because she's probably got some sort of evil brewing behind her. And I'm like, the reveal is that she's not evil, like that's, I don't know, that's more interesting than...
Yeah. And
right.
you mentioned the whole, like, she's an engineer. Like, that is just, like, the most interesting part of her character, and we get none of that this book.
Yeah.
I mean, we get the implication that she's invented a fabrial to dull pain, with the help of someone.
She shows that off.
When she's like excitedly showing it off, that's when she's the most like, oh wait, this is kind of like cute and fun, and I like her. When she's like getting really excited showing it. And, like,
yeah, that was like the only hint of romance in the entire book was when like Dalinar was like fondly looking at her while she like showed off her fabrial. That's romance. Whatever happened in the fucking room with the revealing herself was not romance. All right. The next thing we have is imagery and themes. Do we have any other thoughts on Navani?
Not on.
I'm good to move on.
Imagery and theme. What specifically do we have to say about like imagery and theme? Well, we talked a little bit about the themes. Like Taylor, you were like, it's all about like power and what you do with power.
Yeah, I was more talking about like genuinely, like I just wanted to gush about how cool the imagery in this book was.
Yeah.
Because I think he does a really good job with the wind, and I think he does a really good job with water and how water as like a cleansing element, or water as like a melancholic element as well. Like it's both, like every time... Okay, let's just get into it. Let's talk about the wind first, because like... in the beginning, we think that Syl is a wind spren. We think that Syl is a wind spren for a very long time.
It's the very end of the book that we learn that she's not.
I think that it's not. I think that there is... I don't think that it is necessarily explicit. I think that this is like a book thing, but I love the connection between Kaladin and the wind, because every time he is... I loved catching that every time he walked out of the barracks, the wind blew in some way, and every time he like was walking down the path or like holding the bridge, like he felt the wind on his face. I was like, the wind just follows Kaladin around. It's so beautiful. And honestly, I think that it's not too big. It wouldn't be too big of a deal if like it was too often to not be purposeful, but I would have I think it would stay fine if it's just a narrative, like the curtains are blue because of X, like if like Kaladin is like just like connected to the element of the wind because of like cool like narrative reason, like he's like that's just like as a literary device.
There's not
like,
there's a literary connection, not a mystical connection.
Yeah,
I think there is
exactly.
one time where it's
not...
described like when he's fighting, like the wind dances with him, which I really love.
Yeah,
you're right. I love the wind. It's you describe the Shattered Plains as a character early on in the first episode. Absolutely. And one of the things I love about this series is not just the Shattered Plains as the character, but like Roshar is a character. The Storm is a character. I guess literally with the Stormfather. But like.
Yeah.
But like even if you took away the Stormfather, like the Storm is a character, like the High Storms.
Yeah, so cool. Yeah, and like that's like definitely when especially when he's in the chasm and he picks up the spear and he starts doing the spear dance and
it's incredible.
That's such a cool like thing. And then Syl is like going in between, and during then we thought that Syl was the wind. Syl, I think, does have a connection to the wind, because I think Kaladin has a connection literally to the wind as a device, and so she's like weaving in between him and the wind is like picking up around him, and like, oh, it's just so cool. I just think that that's really cool, and I hope that stays, because I like catching, like, every time Kaladin thinks something honorable, the wind blows, and like bit like his
the wind
cape
is like,
blows.
bro.
Yeah, the wind approves.
There's just a little swirl of leaves that come up with a perfect thumbs up, like from the wind.
I just want to read the Kaladin doing the kata, because it is a really good it's just so different from what we normally see from Sanderson. And like, again, there's a little more work that might be done, like, to get away from his house style, quote unquote. But also, like, if there was just more of this, you know what? It'll do. Like, it's good enough.
I think that scene specifically has such a deep echo throughout the rest of the series, throughout the rest of the book, that, like, he never had to bring up that scene ever again, but I kept going back to that scene, like, myself, because it was, like, so impactful.
Without thinking about it, he snapped up the spear up under his arm into a guard position, point down. Water droplets from its length sprayed across his back. Moash cut off in the middle of another jibe. The bridgeman sputtered to a stop. The chasm became quiet. And Kaladin was in another place. He was listening to Tux chide him. He was listening to Tian laugh. He was hearing his mother tease him in her clever, witty way. He was on the battlefield surrounded by enemies, but ringed by friends. He was listening to his father tell him with a sneer in his voice that spears were only for killing. You could not kill to protect. He was alone in the chasm deep beneath the earth, holding a spear of a fallen man, fingers gripping the wet wood, a faint dripping coming from somewhere distant. Strength surged through him as he spun the spear up into an advanced kata. His body moved of its own accord, going through the forms he'd trained in so frequently. The spear danced in his fingers, comfortable, an extension of himself. He spun with it, swinging it around his neck and over his arm, in and out, jabs and swings. Though it had been months since he'd even held a weapon, his muscles knew what to do. It was as if the spear itself knew what to do. Tension melted away, frustration melted away, and his body sighed in contentment as he worked it furiously. This was familiar. This was welcome. This is what it had been created to do.
Really, really good.
Well, to me, the line that echoes throughout the book is, you're not surprised when, like, a baby
I know the line.
Or something. Yeah.
You were not shocked when a child knew how to breathe. You were not shirked when a sky eel took flight for the first time. You should not be shocked when you hand Kaladin Stormblessed a spear and he knows how to use it.
Oh, so cool.
Pretty good.
So cool.
Spear is best weapon. Anyway.
You have been a sword dude for years.
No. My position is that swords are cool, but I recognize that spears are objectively a better way. Like, in terms of if you were trying to be effective, it's a sword.
Yeah.
If you're trying to be cool as shit, you use it. Or if you're trying to be effective, you use a spear. If you're trying to be cool as shit, you use a sword.
Nah, you know what's cool is, like, when you come out against me using that longsword that you own and is visible just off screen. But instead I have several. God damn it, Jack. God damn it. You know what? You can come after me with a long sword, but you know what's cool? Me stabbing you from 20 feet away with a pike.
I show up to your apartment and you and your roommate and like the rest of your friends just have a pike block. What do I do then? But yeah, no, I think something Stormlight does more so than his other books is really make the world a character. And I think so when people say, because we talked a little bit about how, like, his series, he's held up as, like, being really into world building, Stormlight being, like, this masterwork of world building. We talked about how we don't exactly agree with that on all levels. We talked about how there's, like, a little bit of surface level, especially when it comes to, like, the cultures. But I think that's where people get the impression. I think when people say the like, it's a masterclass in world building, they're picking up on the fact that more so than any of his other books, the world is a character. Like, and every part of the world is a character in this book.
Yeah.
Like in Mistborn, the world kind of felt like a character in Hero of Ages, but, like, it was not to the same degree.
The world was like a dying cough. It was like the world was something needed of saving. Yeah.
I actually want to push back a little bit, because I do think the world is a character in Mistborn. However, to Taylor's point, it is a dying character, and it is supposed to feel less present.
Yeah,
or
exactly.
Warbreaker, the world is just not a character at all. Which, I mean, it's not really what that book was going for, but, like...
No.
Yeah. I think that it felt like the neighborhood of the gods was a character, but beyond that...
Yeah.
And maybe the city at some points, but even that wasn't fully fleshed out. Like, we only got, like, highlights of the city. Didn't feel like the city itself was, like, speaking back to us.
It's mostly just character work.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Which
but no,
I think it worked for that book.
that's something that will, and that's also something that will continue to be like a theme of the book too, because like not only is the world as the character, but like here's all these little spirits, some of whom are obviously intelligent and capable of speech.
Yeah.
Literally, like we literally have still a windspread slash honor spread speaking to you. That is the world speaking to you. That is nature speaking to you right there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. The second thing I had to say is that water is super thematic here. Really important things happen while it's raining. But also, I think there's like water as a new beginning is always is kind of shown here. Like after Kaladin has, you know, rides the high storm and gets this vision from God, the Stormfather one, not the one where he's like dying in the high storm and like have to like scream or whatever. But after that, after he wakes up from his like crazy storm dream, he goes outside with a bar of soap and they use the remnants of the end of the storm to wash themselves clean. And I was like, what a cool like bit of imagery there, where like of like metaphor, where like the water from the high storm is both destructive and dangerous, and then when it's past, we use it to clean ourselves, to cleanse, to let things fall away. Like it's such a cool, like, because the chapter could have ended when we were done with this vision, but it didn't. It kept going. We used the bar of soap. We had a downbeat, and it was like, I don't know. It was just so cool. Like the way that high storms were cleansing, the way that water is sweeps away for something new is like just so cool.
I don't think I picked up on the water as much as you did. I definitely picked up specifically on like the storm and the wind, but you're absolutely right about the water. Or then like also the chasms. There's a lot of talk about how like, yeah, no, the chasms are shaped by like all this flowing water. It's the flowing water that's what brings like all the corpses they have to pick through to them, or like hides them. And I think there's even a scene where it's like sometimes there's places that like more bodies appear and sometimes they don't. Like it's like kind of also an unknowable. And also the water washing clean the shattered plains repeatedly, because there's battles happening over and over and over again. There should be there should be corpses littering the entire thing, but they're constantly being washed away by the high storm repeatedly.
Yeah. I mean, and the high storm is also like what Kaladin had to endure to live. Like he like literally endured the high storm, and that like changed him. Like he left changed.
Jesus.
Yeah. I mean, he's literally put up on a cross, basically.
This is as explicit of a Jesus metaphor that we get.
I mean, again, the Parshendi do call him, like, they do say something that is remarkably similar to the word for savior in Hebrew. Yeah. So it's like, yeah. I mean, Kaladin is definitely the Sanderson Jesus of this book.
I think it was also raining when he volunteered for the army.
Yes, it was during the weeping, which is like...
Oh, yeah, the
one
weeping.
The one time a year where it's like you get several weeks of no high storms and just a kind of constant light rain.
Yeah, and that's a new year. See? So cool. What he's doing with water. I'm a fan. I like it.
And there is just more good imagery in general in this book. Like I distinctly remember the first time the thrill, which is capitalized in the book, vanishes from Dalinar, and Adolin comes in and rescues him. We get a description of Adolin in combat, and Dalinar describes him as the lad was a genius with the blade, an artist with only paint of one shade. And it's like, damn, that is good.
Oh, the thrill in general is also great imagery, because like the fact that the way fight scenes or battles are described changes depending on if the character has the thrill or not. Like when Dalinar has the thrill, we're focused on the action. It's like he's sweeping aside, he kicks a body, he like does all this stuff. And then the moment he doesn't have a thrill, even when he's not freezing up and he's still fighting, when he's not fighting with the thrill, the descriptions are about like the blood and the gore and the carnage and the like stress and pressure, and like the thrill is such a like, which I mean, when we eventually start talking about like the sociology of Way of Kings, the thrill will be an interesting thing to talk about in terms of like, why are the Alethi so warlike? Well, apparently they have this like burgeoning thrill of battle that they all feel.
Yeah.
I think that this is a pretty good transition into talking about the Wheel of Time, because I do think that seeing how the Wheel of Time was written, something that I mentioned was that I loved the way that metaphor was used almost constantly on every page. I think that him training himself to do that made this a better book, because I noticed so much more of that in this book than I remember in other books, where there was a lot of like, he did this like this, and it was, a simile, putting things together, and like, I think that makes it a better book. I think it makes him a better writer.
Yeah, and to give a little bit of the timeline with this book is Way of Kings is a story Brandon has been trying to write for like a decade. At the point this book's been published, he's been trying to write it for a decade. He wrote Way of Kings. We call it now Way of Kings Prime, but like at the time it's just, he tried writing Way of Kings before even Elantris was published, and he didn't really like it. There's a lot of changes. A lot of his annotations talk about the differences between Way of Kings Prime and Way of Kings. I think Kaladin was named Sen, like Cenn, and that's why he uses that as the name for like the kid in that first chapter, because that was Kaladin's character's original name.
It seems like Kaladin's original name was Marin.
Maybe I got that wrong. But like the annotations talk a lot about the differences, and talk a lot about Way of Kings, because this version of Way of Kings is a rewrite of an original draft he wrote a long time ago. Another fun difference is Seth originally didn't have any superpowers. He was just a really good assassin. So giving Seth superpowers was a new thing. So the timeline is like, he originally wrote Way of Kings, or like the first version of it. It was not good, to his own admission. He's like, I don't like how it turned out.
And this is in 2002.
Yeah, he writes the Wheel of Time books, which is a huge undertaking. And regardless of what we think about the Wheel of Time books, taking someone else's series and like finishing it is a crazy feat to do. Like, not everyone can do that. And like Taylor was saying, he learned a lot. And then as soon as he's done writing this first Wheel of Time book, he goes back and is like, I'm going to give another shot to Way of Kings. And like, you can really see like he learned lessons. He has become a better writer.
Absolutely. I could definitely tell.
Things to also note is that the Shattered Plains are not in the Way of Kings Prime at all. And what those come from is from an early version of his book Dragonsteel.
Interesting.
Obviously, that won't be the case anymore. Dragonsteel is going to be its own thing. There's a lot of really interesting differences. Obviously, many of them I can't read because they spoil. Wow, there's stuff going on in this book that don't get revealed until Oathbringer, and it's just one book.
One difference that doesn't matter at all, that I know for sure, is apparently in Way of Kings Prime, Shallan was entering into an arranged marriage with Taravangian.
That's not in here.
I can't. I'm just pulling that out of my, like, as like something I vaguely remember. I'm not like looking at a list or anything.
I mean, the notable differences from the published version: Shallan did not exist. Instead, Yasna had a different redheaded apprentice. Her plotline was completely different from that of Shallan. Although Shinri did eventually evolve into Shallan, Brandon considers the two to be separate characters. Yasna was also a main viewpoint character, which that should have been true in this book too.
Yeah.
Also, Kaladin accepted the shards at the beginning of the novel in this version. I want to talk about this thing that's mentioned so badly, but we don't get him until...
Put a pin on it. Put a pin on it.
Put a pin on it for 2 years from now. 1 year from now.
Yeah.
Probably pull back up that website when we get there.
Sure.
It won't go to waste.
Yeah, Taylor, you're absolutely right that he's clearly learned a lot from his time with Wheel of King.
Wheel of Kings.
Wheel of Time and writing Way of Kings. I'm writing that down. I'm gonna write that book, Wheel of Kings. You can't stop me.
Let them spin. I think it goes a little bit further than that, because I'm an acknowledgements girly. I read every word. And paragraph 4. I'm going to read this. Special thanks goes out to Harriet McDougall, one of the greatest editors of our time, who gave us a read and line edit on this novel out of the goodness of her heart. Wheel of Time fans will know her as the person who discovered, edited, and then married Robert Jordan. The Wheel of Time person, the Wheel of Time editor, she actually did read this book and line edit this book, which I think
no wonder it's
might
so long.
also have an influence, on... I don't know how much influence, but I was noticing things in...
Elaborate on that.
Well, just like the metaphor stuff.
Sure.
And just like bits of writing that I don't think the editing is usually ever that noticeable, but because obviously I don't know what was subtracted. But yeah, I'm noticing I feel like I'm noticing things that someone who line edited The Wheel of Time would approve of, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm seeing prose that someone who's a fan of The Wheel of Time might, or is very into The Wheel of Time, might approve of.
Very fair.
I just thought that was really cool. It was really interesting. Also, I think that it's very clear that The Wheel of Time, or at least Robert Jordan, has a huge influence on this book in the really big plot point that Kaladin's number one rule is you have to care in battle. And we talked about last time that Robert Jordan would shut down and become really, really icy while he was in battle. So I think that he learned that from Robert Jordan, that Kaladin's number one rule is you have to care. You can't shut down. You can't become...
I didn't even think about that. That's a great connection.
What was his name? It was like the ice...
His nickname was the Iceman, but instead of the thrill, Robert Jordan had the zone, is how he described it. And in The Wheel of Time, Rand has the void, where he enters another state where he's emotionless and anything seems possible. He's always at the most efficient.
And then, in this book, we have a lot of Alethi have the thrill, which important to note, Kaladin, despite being a soldier that we see fight a lot, never described as feeling the thrill, which I feel is also kind of important, because important to his characterization.
That's interesting, because I kind of thought that Kaladin felt the thrill, but didn't have the vocabulary for it. I just thought that Kaladin didn't know the word thrill, and so wouldn't call it that.
I think it's implied. I don't know how strongly they do it. There's a little bit of Dalinar talking to Adolin. The thrill is a Alethi cultural thing. If you're a Alethi, you know what the thrill is. It's it's a thing.
I just kind of assumed
soldiers feel.
A farm boy might not know that, but I guess once he's a soldier, he would have.
Well, I think there's something being done here where the thrill is kind of incompatible with Kaladin's worldview, because again, he has to care. And I think part of the thrill of battle is being in love with your own competence. In that, Kaladin finds himself in caring about something else. Kaladin is not able to be in love with his own abilities, even though we see he is a little, because he's still constantly thinking, I'm doing this to save people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually like that reading a lot better than the reading I came across with, which was he just doesn't have a vocabulary for something that he's clearly experiencing. I like that. I like that better, that he actually just does not experience the thrill.
This book essentially presents 3 different reactions to combat and conflict. There's his dad's point of view, Lirin, who's very much you have to learn when to turn the care off. You have to learn when to stop caring. I know Lirin's not a soldier, he's a surgeon, but that line of thinking is constantly pulled forward and referenced in battle. There's the thrill, which is just the thrill of the challenge, the fight, the being out there, the the thrill. And then there's Kaladin, which is no, you have to care what you're fighting about, which is he's always fighting, he's always thinking about his men, he's always trying to protect him. He's fighting, but he's doing it for something, and never forgets that he's doing it for something.
Yeah. Those were my points about the Wheel of Time.
Yeah.
Let's reorder this a little bit, because I want to talk about the idea of cutting world building from Ursula Le Guin, and also just one other point about Le Guin.
Sure.
One of my absolute all-time favorite Ursula Le Guin quotes. Let me pull it up. So this is a quote from Ursula Le Guin about her book, The Dispossessed, which is one of my favorite books. There's a lot to critique in there, but I still think it's really beautiful. She was asked in an interview with The Guardian, if you could make a change to anything you've written over the years, what would it be? In The Dispossessed, I would mention the communal pickle barrels at the street corners in the big towns, restocked by whoever in the community has made or kept more pickles than they need. I knew about the free pickles all along, but I could never fit them into the book. That, to me, is one of the best sentences ever spoken. I think it's incredible, but...
Oh, God.
Part of the reason I want to bring this up is, like, this is one of her absolute favorite things about the book, and she was willing to cut it. Now, granted, Le Guin is doing a completely different thing from Sanderson. Her books are wildly different. This is a science fiction book that's working on, like, real-world ideas of anarchy and stuff like that, and thinking through that. That's all different. But I do want to just lean into that of, like, for example, like, the age thing, like, the time being different. We agree to, like, it doesn't matter going forward. The characters are only a year off their real age, whatever. That doesn't matter. But it's one of those things where it's like, I wish you'd just cut it. Because, like, you can know it, Sanderson. You could know the pickles were there, Brando.
Wait, to be fair, it doesn't show up in the text. We're only
it does eventually.
Does it?
Yeah, it does eventually. I think it shows up in book 4, briefly. I wish there was just some stuff pulled out of it. The other reason I wanted to bring up Le Guin is, with the description of the Wandersail and the Hoyd telling the story there, that's one of my favorite chapters. It doesn't entirely work for me, but again, it is much more of what I am looking for in Hoyd, because again, I didn't like him just being the king's wit. Let me pull up my note. Here it is. Hate wit. What a downgrade from the Hoyd of Warbreaker. He's not funny. If wit has a million haters, I'm one of them. If he has one hater, it's me. If he has 0 haters, I have died. If the world is against wit, I am with the world. If the world is for wit, I am against the world. I just like,
Damn.
but
Strong.
then once we get to his, like, him as a storyteller and he's taking things more seriously, he works for me more. When he's just quippy, I'm like, dude, don't you have, like, some sort of master plan that you're supposed to be on? Why are you here telling jokes? But he sort of just sits in on Kaladin, and one gives Kaladin a flute, but Kaladin asks, like, you mean you play the flute while someone else speaks the story? And Wit does some sort of insane performance, probably aided by magic, or maybe not, where he plays his flute, and then the echoing of the music across the shattered plains continues the music, and then he tells sections of this story about this guy who explores the world, and it's a story about ultimately taking responsibility. It's a huge, very parable-esque story. And all that is okay. I mean, I wish the parable Kaladin was allowed to draw the conclusion on his own a little bit more. I mean, Hoyd gives him the word of, like, so what are you not taking responsibility for? It's like,
I thought that was after.
Yeah, it's after the story. But he does make that further statement. I'm like,
No, after Kaladin makes his judgment, then he goes. He's like, seems like it's about responsibility, and then Hoyd's like, what are you not taking responsibility for?
Yeah, even still, I sort of wish, like, that part of, like, Kaladin is left to think, what am I not taking responsibility for, was on his own, rather than Hoyd supplying it for him. Now, granted, whatever, like, Hoyd is a storyteller and a therapist.
Yeah, I will say that the important part of that story is also in context with the very next chapter, as Sanderson also often does. Where it's Dalinar telling the story this time, where he's reading out of The Way of Kings, and what's important there is Hoyd's lesson from the section earlier, where Sadius has, like, a very dismissive reaction to this, because he's like, oh, actually, stories are important for what you get out of them. Mm-hmm. And so Sadius just brushing off whatever the moral of the story was an important foreshadowing for what was to come in his betrayal.
Yes. I think it's fine that we get that in there. I just wish Kaladin came to the conclusion on his own, rather than Hoyd supplying it. And, like, that way it would still work, as far as I'm concerned.
Like, the thing is, I find myself, as Stormlight goes on, I do like Wit less and less, and I think it's because my patience for, like you said, his, like, quippiness gets lower and lower, and that's clearly a part of Wit Brandon Sanderson enjoys writing.
Mm-hmm. And, like, if that's what you want to do, man, that's fine.
But the thing is consistently, like, you're right. The version of Wit who's the storyteller who tells the story that's needed to be heard. If that was Wit's entire presence in the entirety of Stormlight and the entirety of the rest of the Cosmere, I would love that. If that was solely his presence. He does
Yeah.
that does become him. Like this is Stormlight is where we see the most true version of Hoyd that we will continue to see for the rest of the Cosmere. Like it's where
Yeah.
he like solidifies as like, okay, so this is Hoyd. And that version of him, the showing up to tell an important story when it's needed, if that was literally his only appearance in the book, is every once in a while this random guy with kind of mysterious powers showed up and told a story right when he was needed, I would love it. I would be
Yeah.
so into that. If that was
And again, that's what he does in Warbreaker, and that's why it really works for me. Of like, he's there at the right time.
he does continue
Yeah.
to do that. He just also is making quips, like randomly in other
Yeah.
scenes making quips.
The
I
other
had
thing.
a note about that.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say in the thematically in the Elantris episode, I talked about how one of the main villains would have made more sense as a woman because he was like super super underestimated, and that's what women were in that book. And so in this book, before it was revealed that Hoyd was Hoyd, or the wit was Hoyd, I was like, oh, the King's Wit seems like a really missed opportunity because Hoyd was, or like the wit is a direct challenge to, like a healthy challenge to all the masculinity, all the toxic masculinity that was happening around the table. Like he was kind of being witty in a way that he could like stop all of the like stupid patriarchy stuff that was happening. And I was like, oh, that's such a missed opportunity. Like that should have been a woman because because he stands as a healthy like
Yeah.
challenge to masculinity.
It's funny you say that because one thing I was just thinking is I kind of wish we had Hoyd the storyteller as a character, and then the King's Wit was a separate, different character that wasn't Hoyd.
Yeah, I think the witch should be a woman, and I think that the only reason that the wit is not a woman, because we learn that women are supposed to be the witty ones in this book,
Yeah.
and the really smart ones, is likely because she probably wouldn't be respected in this, like, really patriarchal, like,
Yeah.
army society, which is a shame.
To
I think it's a missed opportunity.
To real quick explain to listeners, and because I actually love this little tiny bit of world building, the King's Wit is a position sort of similar to the King's Jester, except the whole idea is that the king can't debase himself by insulting people. So he has this other guy whose job it is to insult people. So the king has this entire position in his court, which is just some random guy whose job is to insult people. Like, on behalf of the
keep
king.
people humble.
And also, it is legal to kill the King's Wit in public, but you forfeit your land and titles.
So yeah, it's like you can kill him and you won't be held to like, to the normal punishments of murder, but you just are like, gotta leave. And then it's also implied that like it's like only if they know they killed him, so there's a lot of wits that were like quietly assassinated.
Yes.
Like without anyone knowing exactly who did it. So it's like if you're caught killing the wit, you lose your land and title.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think Navani even makes a point where she's like, when she meets with Wit and she's like, has no one done my son? Yeah, has no one done my son a service and killed you yet?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that is like a funny bit of world building, but could 100% be modified in a way where it makes more sense that someone really, really smart and really, really like sassy could.
Yeah. I would love
be
to
this
see that
challenge
version
to
of it.
masculinity. Yeah.
The other thing that I want to bring up in terms of Hoyd's storytelling, it worked for me more in Warbreaker because it was much more of a story than it was here. This feels like a recounting of a history. It does have a little bit of a storybook quality, but with Hoyd's knowledge, you get the understanding that this is a thing that happened. I kind of wish it was just allowed to be a parable. Because, like, this is just a cold shot. I have no idea if it's true. I bet they're going to find the Wandersail, or, like, it's still a ship that's around, or something like that. And if that's true, Jack, don't even give me a hint.
I'm not saying anything, no.
I just wish it was more of just a story. Like, and again, I'm going to compare him to Le Guin again. Whenever someone tells, like, a fairy tale story in Earthsea, they begin with, as long ago as forever and as far away as Celador, which, like, I find extremely evocative, and I think is really sort of good for this storybook kind of writing. And I wish there was a little bit that of here. Now, granted, it's unfair of me to compare Sanderson to Le Guin. Like, it's not a crime to not be as good as one of the best to ever do it. But I do wish there was more of this sort of storybook quality and more of this cultural work, because, again, I'm kind of waiting for the Wandersail to pay off in this different way, where I wish I didn't have that instinct to go, oh, this is probably going to pay off in some way. I wish it was just, damn, wasn't that great?
I think you're absolutely right, and we will get stories that are very clearly like, you know, parable fairy tales. But the one, yeah, I understand that like feeling where it's like it, because it's Sanderson and because we know what he tends to do. Yeah, like you listen to the story and you're like, oh, I can't wait till that's like super relevant to the resolution of the conflict in book 6, like that kind of
yeah
that kind of thing. Like it turns out that once again, like I'm fully like not spoiling. I'm just like saying random shit right now. It's like to beat the bad guy in
I
book
can't
6.
believe you know the ending of book 6
Yeah, to
already.
beat the bad guy in book 6, we need to go find this like island and like find like the legendary sword that's like hidden there that the emperor of that island used.
I honestly thought that the Wandersail, I don't think that they're going to find the Wandersail. I do think that that legend is going to inspire some of the women to start engineering something like the Wandersail. That's the extent I think it's going to go to. I don't think we're going to find this.
Maybe we'll get like the Wandersail 2 or something like that.
Yeah. Like a ship named after the Wandersail. Like,
with that, do we want to go into your predictions and then we can end with the question from Eamon?
Sure. I mean, did we talk about technology advancement and stuff?
I mean, that's what Eamon's question is about.
I just want to real quick say, because this kind of ties more into imagery and theming. I do love the technology in this book. For listeners that haven't read it, the way it works is all technology are fabrials, which are little devices where it's like gemstones filled with stormlight, and like depending on the gemstone, depending on the wire caging of it, depending on what like spren they use, like it's like all this like it's all magic. It's very clearly magic. We're talking about like gemstones powered by stormlight to like do stuff. But it's like I just find it like a really clever little magic system that so it's like you get to read about and understand people like developing these new technologies. Like span reeds are like, the way they work is like you take a ruby like that's like magically infused in the right way, you split it in half, one half on one pen, one half on the other pen, and when they're activated they move like in concert. And that's like just these like really basic little like concepts are what all the technology does. And the whole book constantly has this undercurrent of like technology is progressing, like people are figuring things out. One of the big Seth fight scenes is he encounters people using half shards, which is like people are constantly trying to recreate shard blades and shard plate, which are like ancient artifacts that no one's been able to crack how they're made. But like there's half shards, which are shields, which are just like magically infused to be super strong, and they can actually like withstand a hit or two from a shard blade. And I personally like that there's this undercurrent of like in the background, like all the main characters are doing all this funky stuff, discovering ancient magic, blah, blah, blah. But like the world is chugging on behind them, and the world behind them is chugging on and like discovering new things on its own that become relevant. And I personally really like that, but there's a lot more to say about it that we'll get to with the email Graham's already mentioned.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So are we gonna... I'm going to say some things I think might happen.
Mm-hmm. I also have some predictions, because there are some things I know for sure, and then some things I don't.
I feel like my predictions aren't even predictions. My predictions are like they're just like things that the way I think the world works are more like my predictions, not like what's going to happen. All right, where to start? Well, I already talked about if Dalinar... already talked about if Dalinar is forgetting his wife. What's the boon or the curse? I'm 90% sure it's the curse, but there's still 10% of me that thinks the reveal is going to be that he asked to get his memory erased because something extra traumatic happened with the death of the wife or something, and things went super horribly wrong, and he's like, that's gotta go. It's gotta go. I can't be remembering that. It's fucking with my everyday life. He put it in the literal fire in his brain. And it just kind of... And he went to get it magically removed. So 10%. Again, 90% I do trust him when he says it's the curse, and I think that's the more likely outcome. But 10% is holding on. That's what's up. Biggest thing that I picked up on is that I think souls are going to be far more important than it seems like they are. It keeps coming back to this idea of the soul, so much so that I started actually marking every time the soul was mentioned in this book. I think specifically talking about, it starts, obviously with shard blades shearing through the soul, and then what specifically happens is that your eyes go black. So I think obviously the eyes are like the windows to the soul, but I think there's even a deeper connection. We learned almost nothing about the 10 essences. I think that the 10 essences have something to do with the soul, and there's a connection there that I am not allowed to make yet. I was trying very hard to, but I just have not been given enough information. But so much so that I even started writing down what the 10 essences are. Whatever the essence of the heart is significant to shard blades in some way, because I think the heart might have something to do with mist, smoke, the way that shard blades are summoned has to do with 10 heartbeats, and I think whatever the essence of the heart will be significant in some way in piecing together this entire world-building stuff. But we are never given what the essence of the heart is. Shalon says she specifically, when she's taking a memory of someone, that she specifically snips free a bud of their soul to cultivate it onto her page. And I think that, obviously, it's called soul casting. That seems extremely significant. There's something here about the soul that I'm not allowed to put together yet that I think is really interesting. Souls are almost and maybe souls will be kind of the third magic system that he brings up, that he always does in his later books or something. The surprise twist at the end, the surprise twist that's inevitably coming, that there's a third kind of thing. Well, obviously there's probably 4 more types of things, actually.
It's all exponential. We learn 1 magic system in this book. Next book we'll learn 2. Then the book 3 we'll learn 4 new magic systems.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
A Fibonacci sequence of magic systems.
Exactly.
Something's going on. Something's going on with the shard blades, obviously. And I don't think that shard blades were ever made to kill people.
Okay.
I think that that's the twist. I think the twist is that everybody's shard blades are dull and not used correctly because they kill people now, and they were just meant to kill horrible monstrosities of darkness and void.
It's interesting that you bring that up, because Dalinar has the whole sequence of why were there never shards made for normal people?
Yeah.
Because he has a whole sequence where he digs a latrine pit by himself, and it's great.
I love that sequence where I call it his crashing out sequence, where he just completely
and that's him using shards built for war, and he's able to make a latrine pit instantly. Imagine if he had shards not built for built to do that.
Imagine if he had a shard hammer, instead of having to use a normal warhammer, which gets destroyed.
There's also a part in during the recreance, all the shard bearers, they put their swords down, and then they will start to walk away, and Dalinar feels a really deep sense of grief and loss that I think is the spren in the swords, aka the soul of the swords. So it kind of shows that the swords had feelings through the spren. That's kind of just me putting things together. So I think that the swords at their best, the shard blades at their best, had feelings about... Yeah, I think they were alive.
Okay.
In the way that... I don't think it's going to be exactly the way that Nightblood was alive, but I think that Nightblood, the sword from Warbreaker, is kind of an interesting way to think about where shard blades might be going. Yeah. What else do I've got going on here? when in my souls category. I have a whole category talking about souls. What I think's going on with the soul. Because also the spren are said to be the souls of things, which is like, everything's connected. I feel like I'm like drawing some damn red lines. It's all been souls. Why aren't we talking about it? I am. Anyways. And
so brave.
also I think it was it was interesting that Capsule, even though we find out he's not actually an ardent, kept talking about how we were worried for Shallan's soul specifically, which is weird. Not worried about her faith, worried about her soul. I think that has to do with just... I wish he would have... It seems specific, though. It seems like why the soul? Because, like, if it's...
We don't really get it here in terms of, like, Vorin beliefs, but... I mean, the heralds do go to a place described as damnation. So I'm wondering if, like, since they have what's the name of the heaven?
The Tranquiline Halls.
Something hall.
The Tranquiline Halls. So they have the Tranquiline Halls for heaven, and they have damnation for hell. So I'm wondering if, like, he's genuinely doing like, you'll go to hell, honey.
Right, and I wish he would have just said that. It kind of seems specific that he keeps saying, I'm worried for your soul, instead of just saying, I'm worried you won't go to the Tranquiline Halls when you die. That's why I was, like, tipped off. I was like, why do we keep saying, like, you're worried for the soul and you're not just worried?
I actually just realized we're never told in the religion what happens to sinners. It's only ever just, like, yeah, you will go to the Tranquiline Halls and do your calling. We never actually learn what the consequences of being a sinner is to their religion.
I kind of thought that if you were like a bad person, you become a slave in the Tranquiline Halls or something. You become like a bridge runner.
That would be
like
very...
That'd be in line with Mormon beliefs. I mean, kind of.
That would fit really well with Vorinism if that's true. Like, it's like, yeah, you're all going to the Tranquiline Halls, but like, who are you going to be there?
Yeah.
God, jeez.
I think that, that makes sense.
Awful.
To me. I also think it's interesting that a shard blade specifically, I don't know if this has anything to do with the magic system. I think it's just something interesting I caught. That if you're killed by a shard blade, you are unable to do a death rattle because of how quick your death is. I think that there might be a connection there, because if the shard blades are like on the evil side or something, that not being able to hear prophecy when you're killed by a shard blade seems maybe specific. I don't know if I'm just making things up. I don't know if I'm just putting together some dots that maybe don't matter.
One thing to point out, it is brought up that in Vorinism, they see seeking the prophecy, seeking the future as like a sinful, evil, blasphemous thing.
Oh, that's true.
Like they like
that's true.
Like prophecy, like seeing the future is of the void bringers. Like that's like a... So, like, that's
sure.
what, like, I think they make referencing that gambling is, like, a really thin line between blasphemous and, like, not blasphemous.
Yeah. I do think that's interesting. But, I mean, if the shard, or if, like, that was some sort of influence from odium in some way, like, because prophecy can be helpful to a population, I don't know. But I think it's just interesting that shard blades kill you too fast to death rattle.
Mm-hmm. Actually, just as another Wheel of Time parallel, the fact that the soul is separated from the body as it's described with a shard blade, that's very Balefire from Wheel of Time. Of like, the Balefire removes you from the narrative in Wheel of Time. Quite literally.
Yeah. Interesting.
Because you can't be reborn in that cycle, you're just dead. Anyway.
This is not really a prediction, but I remember that Gaz is gone.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like some fucked up shit's happening to him right now. I think he's in some sort of torture chamber, and he's gonna come out as some sort of fucked up amalgamation of, like, Stormlight that we're gonna have to deal with. I don't know. I think he's a victim. I don't know what he's a victim of. He's gone.
All we know about Kaz right now is he's the sergeant in charge of the Bridgemen. And he's kind of framed as, like, a villain because he's, like, a complete asshole. But we also learn that, like, he's only in that position because he has severe gambling debts. And then he just disappears, like, randomly, like, near the end. He just stops showing up.
Well, the person... what happens is that, like, the Light Eyes in charge of Gaz gets murdered because of Kaladin's actions, or gets executed because of Kaladin's actions. someone else comes in, and when that someone else comes in, Gaz, like, very soon after, like a few weeks after, mysteriously stops showing up, and that Light Eyes kind of takes charge of everything, and we do not even see Gaz at all.
Yeah.
So I just remember that something's going on with him. I have no
You
clue what
remember
it is, but I do
Gaz when
think
no
that
one else
something-
does.
I think something traumatic as hell is going to be revealed about that guy. I think in the very beginning, Syl was a foil to Tien for a while, where the two of them were kind of what Kaladin was fighting for. So I thought that Syl was going to end up being like the soul of Tien coming back to like take care of him, take care of Kaladin. That was wrong. But
That was actually a weirdly
that
common
was my
theory.
prediction.
I'm just gonna say, like in like the Stormlight communities, like for people who have only read Way of Kings and haven't read the rest, a lot of people, that's a pretty common prediction, is that like we're gonna learn that Syl is like Tien's soul come back.
Yeah, I mean, it's really cute. I mean, also the way that this book is written, obviously, you're meant to think about the past and present at the same time. And so Syl brings him a little leaf. Tien always brings him rocks. It's like, and they're also, like, he keeps fighting for both of them. What else? I was caught up on the line that in The Way of Kings, this was not really brought up after, like, okay, it's on page 242 in my book. It's not brought up after page 242, which is like extremely early in this book. But The Way of Kings says that the Light Eyes were beneath Dark Eyes in the past. The only reason why I would think that Light Eyes are beneath Dark Eyes is because I do think that Light Eyes have something to do with Stormlight, and I think that Stormlight in the past was something that people feared because of how powerful it is. And so a reason why you would want to stop the Light Eyes from doing what Light Eyes do is because they've got some sort of inherent connection to Stormlight that the Dark Eyes don't necessarily have.
Interesting.
Goes back to the souls, because what gets burnt out when your soul is severed? Think about it.
Your eyes, that's true. The other I took the Light Eyes being beneath the Dark Eyes as an idea of the Knights Radiant, or does this is a section from the book before the Knights Radiant exist, actually, right? Because this is a quote from The Way of Kings, which was written before they exist.
Way of Kings was written after they exist.
The ancient Knights Radiants were influenced by The Way of Kings. It suggested that their ideals were based off the book, and that's from chapter 52 of Way of Kings, according to Coppermind. I think there's the idea, even still, like, there's the implication that people with powers predate the Knights Radiant. I think the implication there is that people with these powers were servants because they always had to be on call for a desolation.
Interesting. Yeah, that's fair.
There's also that one vision Dalinar has where he meets the writer of The Way of Kings. Which we don't actually ever know his real name, like Nohadon, but like we learn that that's just the kind of religious figure name he's been given over time. I don't know that they ever actually say his real name, or if we ever learn it. But
it's like meeting Jesus and then calling him Jesus, and Jesus being like, "Who?"
Yeah,
yeah.
But
Jesus would be like, "My name is Josh, man."
But Nohadon in that
or Yeshua.
talks about like the danger of surge binding, and there needs to be a way to control it. And there's a kind of implication that the Knights Radiant were putting structure onto the use of these powers.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. So seeing them as servants.
Yeah, the founding of the Knights Radiance was adding some level of structure and control to people using these dangerous powers.
Well, I got excited that there might have been some sort of cultural flip where...
I mean, it's possible that's still there.
Like, maybe that's, like, maybe, like, Stormlight is how Thunderclasts and the evil stuff came to light, as well as, like, the good guys. So, like, Stormlight was seen as, like, something to be feared. I don't know.
Also, the series is called the Stormlight Archive, so, like...
Period.
Stormlight might be more important than just, like, the thing that makes magic work.
It almost certainly is. Finally, I think my last prediction is that... So, when Shallan does her art, she likes to take basically mental pictures of people, and it's called memory with a capital M. So she takes memories of people, and it is kind of juxtaposed with the thrill, which is also capital T, thrill. And so I think that they are I think that we're meant to think that they're related, so I do think that they're related. And
or at least the same kind of thing.
Like they're both like mystical in nature.
Yeah, they're mystical in nature. I think that they are. I think that Stormlight is connected to both of them, even if we're not literally drawing Stormlight. I think that maybe the thrill and the memory might also be a precursor, some sort of flag that if you have these things, that you could eventually become part of the Knights Radiant. Like, I think that that's like a precursor to magic in some ways.
Yeah. Which
that was kind of what I thought when I thought that Kaladin didn't have the vocabulary to say he had the thrill. And now that I've kind of determined that no, he just definitely specifically did not call what he did in battle the thrill, I'm a little bit more hesitant to think that. But they're both light eyes. Maybe that's what something to do with the eyes and being a light eyes has to do. Gives you maybe this extra thing that is interesting. I don't know if dark eyes get the thrill.
It's important to we never get a dark-eyed character. The only people that explicitly mention getting the thrill are like Sadius, Dalinar, and Adeline.
Yes,
but those are also the only perspectives we get of like real true battle.
We don't know. That's where I'm at.
I think
that's everything.
It is important when it comes to like how much we're talking about light eyes. It is important to note that it's not the whole world that thinks light eyes are the ones that need to be in charge. It's like specifically Vorinism. In fact, I actually found this a really funny scene where Sigzil is trying to talk about the leadership of another nation, and he keeps calling them Bright Lords, but like keeps having to be like they're a Bright Lord, but not without light eyes. And it's like, how can you be a Bright Lord without light eyes? And because in universe they're talking in like Alethi, they're not talking in English. Yeah. He's just like, your language doesn't have a word for noble, like a nobleman that's not like connected to their eye color. And I just thought that was a kind of like a funny little scene where he's like to us we would just use the word like noble or aristocrat or whatever, but the word for noble in Alethi is a direct reference to their eye color.
Right.
The other thing that this is just kind of unrelated, to go back to Noadon briefly, on Coppermind, apparently he is a direct analog. This is one of the few times that Sanderson said a character is a direct analog for something in Mormonism. He is an analog for King Benjamin, who is a king in the Book of Mormon who who idealizes the life of a farmer and like takes on his burdens, despite the fact that he's a king. Once again, it's the most Mormon book yet. Anyway.
Interesting. Yeah.
One thing, sort of a prediction, sort of not. I was wondering if Taylor, you were going to bring it up as our resident bisexual spotter, and Shallan being bisexual is a very funny like theory.
Wait, I said that.
Did you say that earlier?
I didn't say it earlier. I said it in my reading. I didn't think it was important to bring up.
I want to bring it up
because of how much I bisexual coded all the. I was told that I did a lot of bisexual coding for the Warbreaker characters, so I'll back on this.
No, okay. Bisexual coding Shallan is really common, and the thing I want to point out is a quote from Brandon Sanderson in an interview, which is like. It was so common to call Shallan bisexual, and people would keep coming up to Brandon Sanderson and asking about it, being like, you said this, does that mean she's bisexual? And Brandon Sanderson's response is, that wasn't directly on my mind while writing, but looking back, yeah. Shallan being bisexual has been retroactively made canon.
Yeah, the way that she, like, is always talking about Yasna's titties, I'm like, girl.
She was queer coded so hard by the audience that the author accepted it as canon.
Because it doesn't actually matter, I guess. There is a last thing. And it's about the connections between the hero of ages through Adonalsium.
Mm-hmm.
Adonalsium.
Yep, we get another name drop of Adonalsium.
Yes, so Hoyd mentions that to Dalinar.
I went back and I read what Sazed had to say about Adonalsium, and he says, I sense capital S shards of something from long ago. I don't know what that means, but they're shards. Sazed knows about the shards. I don't know what the shards are. There's something going on. Also, specifically, the king in the end, the Almighty, he says, you need to return the shards to the people. He does not say shard blades. He does not say shard plate. He says you need to return the shards. I don't know what that means, but I don't think it's connected to the shard blades or the shard plates.
Real quick, sometimes people collectively refer to shard plate and shard blades as shards.
Sure. I don't think that I still think that there's something else going on here where there's a capital S because Sazed said I sense shards from something long ago. They think of the capital S shards differently than just the regular schmegular people who offhandedly refer to shards as both plate and...
Remind me, so I am absolutely sure not to accidentally spoil stuff. Remind me, what do you know about Adonasium? About
Nothing.
that? Nothing.
Hoyd mentions the name, and then we have that note from Sazed.
Okay.
Yeah, Hoyt's like Adonalsium because he thinks that Dalinar's gonna know that name for some reason.
Like testing him, like...
Yeah, and then Dalinar's like, what? And he's like, never mind. So I think that Dalinar, once again, dum number 1, is gonna misread the whole you gotta return the shards to the people, and it's not actually gonna be what he thinks it is. It's not actually gonna be the shard blades and the shard plate. The shards are much bigger.
He goes on a quest to collect every shard blade and just starts giving them to random farmers he comes across.
No, he just collects them for himself, actually. And he has a scroll wheel that he goes through every time he has to
it's like,
summon one.
which shard blade
shall I use today?
I don't think it's ever said in this book, like, whether or not you can have more than one shard blade attuned, but there's no reason to think you can't. So he's just like, which of my 30 shard blades shall I summon today?
Yeah,
I would say that it's to me it seems like you can have more than one shard blade when Seth sees in the very first in the prologue, Seth sees Gavilar's shard blade and goes, I don't need another curse. I'm gonna leave this. I'm good.
Mm-hmm.
Deuces. So to me that seems like you can take 2 shard blades.
Here's specifically what Sazed says. Even now I can barely grasp the scope of all of this. The events surrounding the world seem larger than the final empire and the people within it. I sense shards of something from long ago, a fractured presence, something spanning the void. I have delved and searched and only been able to come up with a single name, Adonasium. Who or what it was, I do not yet know.
Okay.
Crazy. And shards is capitalized. Mm-hmm. He says shards capitalized.
I like that you're picking up on like the things that get capitalized, because that's like that's a thing Sanderson does constantly.
Mm-hmm.
Crazy. All right. What's I think I'm done.
Yeah.
I am done.
All right. Then let's read this email from Eamon. Kia ora, beachcombers. Apologies in advance for the massive email. Been listening to the pod, and as a fan of both Sanderson and Critical Read-Through podcasts, contextualizing the work of a very prolific author, it's been a delight. It's nice to hear people discuss Sanderson critically and seriously. I just want to first shout out how the method is paying off, as they say. When Taylor accidentally predicted the arc of Sazed, mentioning how he's almost Sion-like, I had to take my headphones off and fist pump in the air. This is such a fascinating read, and it's one that has made me think about Sanderson's writing in new ways. Similar how to AI in science fiction and real life are coded as feminine, it seems Sanderson might have a tendency to code race, and a specific type of racialization, into his non-human characters. We'll be interested to see how this read develops, or if it holds up, or if you continue throughout the Cosmere. Anyway, on to the subject of this letter. In your bonus episode on Warbreaker, there's a brief discussion on how one of Sanderson's goals is to depict a fantasy universe and its technological progression, essentially asking, why didn't Middle-earth invent guns? Without spoiling too much of what's to come, it's something I wanted to reach out and flag for future episodes. I think it will be a useful point of discussion as Sanderson's stories progress. And as a fellow comms major, I couldn't resist the opportunity to talk about culture, technology, and techniques. Sanderson seems to be good at considering the scientific implications of his magic systems, but not really the sociological ones. Generally, the Cosmere seems to depict a universe where technological complexity steadily goes up the longer time goes on, with certain inventions being inevitable. Broadly, I think this is a pessimistic view of history and technology, which only ends up reinforcing the current technological regime, instead of using the strengths of genre to question it. I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts on the matter. If there's works within speculative fiction you'd like to shout out for handling this idea particularly well, etc. Thanks for making a wonderful podcast, and remember, Taylor is always right. Also, the Royal Archives are technically not a library. Thanks for bearing with me on this massive email. Amen.
I love. Did Eamon mention their pronouns, or is there an indication of that? Or?
I believe they. Let me actually check, because I'm in a Discord server with Eamon, and he should have them available. I will find them.
But regardless, I love what they bring up, because like I love the element of technological progress, and that's a huge thing in Stormlight. I don't think it's a big spoiler to say that, like, as the books go on, we continue to get new little, like, look at this new thing that was developed. Look at this new thing that was developed. That will be a constant theme of Stormlight. Is
he, him?
Yeah, constant theme throughout the books. Technology is always progressing, but he's absolutely right that there's not a huge sociological like dig into it. We talked about it earlier, but like span reads, I was shocked when reading this book, rereading Way of Kings, and they mentioned span reads being a new technology. And I was shocked, because I was like, they are so ingrained in this culture, and like everyone is familiar with their use. Everyone has a span read connected to everybody else. There's no way this is a brand new technology. Or like it doesn't feel like a brand new technology. It feels like something everyone's been using forever. And then similarly, I think the only reference we get to people and culture like reacting to new technology is Dalinar makes a comment about how like, oh, these new heating fabrials, like not as good as a good old fire, but like they're kind of just adopted without any kind of acknowledgement about how they might actually change culture or people's thoughts about the world. It's just people used to use fires, and now they use heating fabrials, and that's just development.
Yeah. In terms of like a recommendation for stuff that handles cultural world building really well and how technology influences that, I have to shout out The Dandelion Dynasty by Ken Liu, which I think Eamon has already read, actually. But sort of the interesting thing there is you will see how a technology develops and then how that gets used culturally really, really well. For example, the setting for The Grace of Kings, the Dandelion Dynasty, is what the author calls silk punk, where he sort of goes, what if you took sort of traditional Chinese technology and made it just a little steampunk? So it's like traditional Chinese technology in the first book, but they also have airships and this sort of thing. All of this sort of progression. The cultural work there is really cool. And then like airships are very present in the technology. And one of the things that's really cool about that book is in between chapters, the gods of the world, the gods of Dara, are sort of a Greek chorus for what's going on in the book.
Oh, that's
they'll
super
reflect
cool.
on, it's awesome. It's so cool. They'll reflect on what's going on in the plot. They'll be like, hey, when that guy did that, was that a move that you had a hand in? And sometimes they'll be like, yeah, that was my guy. Or sometimes they're like, no, he did that on his own. And it's like this awesome thing back and forth. But we also notice the gods of Dara change as the technology of Dara changes. So like when new technologies come up, they become the gods of these technologies as well, and they incorporate them into their worship and stuff like that. It's all really well done. Those books aren't perfect, but they are some of my absolute favorites. There's also a particular thing in the fourth book in that series, The Speaking Bones, where it's a perfect blend of like cultural and technological world building. I'm speaking literally about what the title of that book refers to for anyone who has read those books. I highly recommend them.
What's the first book called?
The Grace of Kings by Ken Liu.
So we're learning the Way of Kings, and now we're going to learn the Grace of Kings.
The Grace of Kings. Oh wow.
Taylor, I think you would have a little bit of a problem with the first book, but as we go along, you would like it more and more. There is not a lot of roles for women in the first book, but then as you go along, you realize it's like, oh no, this is a misogynistic society, and also our transition is like the book is transitioning away from that as we get progression, because like the first book covers like 40 years, but then by the time you're at the end of book 4, it's like 150 years later after the start of the first book. It is like truly an epic on grand scale.
Yeah, it's like Sanderson is determined to show how technology progresses in like a scientific sense without wanting ideas to progress in the same way that technology is like feminism is feminism going to be invented? Like probably not. Like is like right? Like stuff like that. Like, is the idea of like that, because those are inventions. Like, those are really important things that drive society forward in like the same way that like
we may get little
the light
bits of
bulb
that
would
in
or
the
whatever.
form of like an individual character positing an idea that's like framed as like a new way of thinking that to like us as modern people we recognize. It's like, oh, that person right now is
Yeah.
talking about feminism. But as terms of a cultural movement, in terms of a like
Yeah.
not really the same way we get technology. And even with technology
Yeah.
developing, we don't ever really see it change culture beyond like logistics of warfare.
Yeah.
We get I know this isn't a new technology, but we get a reference to like how soul casters are what make like Alethi war making possible, because they can like produce food, like they can turn stone into food.
They don't
Yeah.
need supply lines at all.
And like we get a lot about how soul casters make warfare easier, but we never get a real look at how soul casters, which are like I mean, I know they're like ancient religious relics, but they also are of kind of a form of technology, really affect culture. I guess we get a little bit of the religious, like the religion is really based on like change and transformation.
Well, the other thing about the religion is we know that everyone has a calling, particularly if they are like a member of the Voron church, and they are specifically trying to do like calling as an artist. And it's disappointing to me that we never get like, what does an artist look like who uses a soul caster? Or something like that. To bring back the point that friend of the show Sophie brought up way back years ago now, but we brought up on our Mistborn episode, is like, well, when in the world of Mistborn, when there are people who have super perception, I want to see the people who work that into their art. And we get a little of that in Warbreaker, of like, people who have more breaths can appreciate art more deeply because they have a different perception, but we never really see how that affects.
I thought we did get it a little bit. Like there's reference to like statues being made of like crazy materials.
Yeah. In
like...
Warbreaker we get this, but we don't get this outside.
In Stormlight, like we get like,
oh really?
They like a way of making art is they first construct something out of a very easy to like maneuver material.
Oh, that's true.
And then soul cast it into like crystal or marble or something.
Okay. I must have missed that.
Shallan touches a marble railing, and it has wood grain. I thought you were going to refer to when Yasna, when she runs out of ink, will burn the words into the page. Soulcasting.
That's also yes, that is cool. That I think is good.
Which, now that we know that it's just like a natural power we have, it's like it makes sense that it's so casual. But when we think it was like a wholly super powerful artifact, it's like, man, she's using like super
she is
crazy,
a heretic.
Rare. It's also important to note that soulcasters aren't like crazy common. Like kind of like shard blades. Like there's
the fact that she has one, the church is furious about it. Although she doesn't actually.
I don't know if I think like Alethkar has like a couple dozen soulcasters, and they're one of the kind of some of the shard blades where it's like they have more than anybody else, but that still only is like a couple dozen.
Yeah, no one in the entire city of Cabarinth has one, for sure. And it was like a rare treat that she was there.
But I do think Eamon brings up this good point of the technology seems to be aimed at recreating Earth things in the world of the magic system. Now, granted, like, a soulcaster is nothing like what we have on Earth, but it does seem like there are fabrials that are space heaters and that sort of thing. And I do think that this is something in Sanderson where it's like, I mean, this is technically a spoiler, but I think it's a word of Brandon and it's not in any of the books. But at a certain point, Hoyd says he's really excited about Scadrial progressing because they're the first world that's going to invent instant noodles. Like, that is a thing that Brandon has said. Now, like, that's a funny joke, but it is also like, one weird thing to use your gift of prophecy for, Hoyd. But it is sort of like there is an inevitability to Earth culture where I think that, like, there's probably, like, I don't know if Scadrial ends up looking like Earth.
You're absolutely right where, like, there is an element of, like, yes, there's technological progression, which I like, but, and this is kind of like seeing technology progression as, like, this inevitable thing. There's this sense of inevitably, like, there is a way technology progresses. Like, there is a path. I love talking about this, but this was one of my greatest takeaways from in college. Like, you know, I did physics in college, but when I had the opportunity, I would take electives, introduction to
I thought it was Native American Studies.
Yeah, Introduction to Native American Studies, where that whole class was about, which I really loved. It was an introduction to what is the modern day situation for like Indigenous Americans, and like what is the historical context that led to it. And I love that class, and I wish I could have taken more classes because it very much was an introduction. But my biggest takeaway was when we were learning about like the cultures, specifically like the ecological knowledge or the political knowledge or the modes of structuring society, or in particular, the modes of thinking about things like gender and sexuality that were common in indigenous cultures, which is, this culture that for many thousands of years was separated from Afro-Eurasian cultures, which are all like interacting and commenting and reacting to each other. There was this part of the world that had people that were not interacting with and connecting with in conversation with those people for time. And my biggest takeaway was this idea of like, there is no inevitable way of thinking about these technologies, or like
there is no civ skill tree.
There's no civ skill tree, right? Like the Native Americans, the indigenous people of America were incredibly technologically advanced in ways that were not the same way Europeans were technologically advanced. Like Europeans had, they were more advanced in terms of like, they knew, like they had steel and gunpowder, but like the ecological knowledge that a lot of indigenous groups had are things we like modern America has only caught up to in like the 60s. Like modern America has caught up to like a lot of oral traditions of indigenous people regarding ecology in like the 1960s.
And I also think that we in the West we in America and like descendants of Europeans specifically center technology only in the effect of like tool use and stuff like that. But we limit the idea of like social technology. Like, for example, Christmas is a technology. And we don't think about it that way, but it absolutely is. It's a thing we invented to celebrate, to gather community, to exchange gifts, all these things. Like, you could also make the case that Christmas is a capitalist technology as well. Like, it stops being about this thing, about this social gathering, and it starts being about consumption. It's a technology in all these different ways. But you wouldn't describe, like, oh yeah, the technological advancement of Christmas. And maybe we should.
No, I think honestly, I wanna do a plug for old writing by Graham. You're gonna have to correct me on the pronunciation of this guy's name. Ted Chiang.
I think it's Ted Chiang. Yeah, let me double check.
He wrote Exhalation. He wrote Your Name, not Your Name. What's it called? The short story that like
Stories of Your Life.
Stories of Your Life. Which there's the movie which I'm forgetting the name of, Arrival. Which is what Arrival is like a near one-to-one of Story of Your Life, the short story. And I want that guy to give Brandon Sanderson a crash course on technology and social like impact of technology. Because that is all this guy does is write brilliant short stories that are all about like, hey, here's some crazy technology. Let's really look at how like humankind and human culture would react to this technology. And he has an entire short story which basically centers around the correct idea that you don't often think about, of writing is a technological advancement that affected our way of thinking and our way of approaching the world. Like, great short story where it keeps cutting between like modern day, where there's like a technology being invented which basically allows people to have perfect memory. It's like, I think there's a Black Mirror episode really similar, where people are basically always recording through their eyes and can like go back through their recordings. And the way that's changing like the way people think, the way people act in society, and goes back to a story which I'm pretty sure is, I think the Native American group they talk about is real, but the story itself is fictional, of this indigenous group reacting to the introduction to writing by Christian missionaries. Like how writing is changing their culture and their way of thinking about the world. And I wish there was some of that in, and then these Sanderson books have a very much technology is inevitable. technology progression in the Western European like technological progression is inevitable.
And again, this is something I brought up yesterday about the Alethi, is like, I think part of the reason that people so often do fan art of them or fan fiction of them and describe these characters as white, even though they are textually and confirmed by the author to be people of color, is because it's so ingrained with this sort of Western European worldview of this progression of technology and this sort of, again, it's supposed to be a caste system, but it doesn't really follow caste in the way that India followed caste. It follows caste in the way that caste sometimes was a byproduct of feudalism. Like, it's like the Alethi society is much more close to a feudal society than it is actually to like an Indian caste system. Oh, also, just something I wanted to bring up. It's weird to introduce a caste system into your book and then have one of your first named characters be Dalit, which is one of the castes in Indian society, is the lowest caste, the untouchable. And like the second dude who gets a name is the character of Dalit, who is the dude who teaches the young boy that Kaladin saves in the first chapter.
I wonder if Sanderson even knew that.
It feels like another spook scenario where it's like
a spook or thug situation.
Yeah, it's like
a random amalgamation of letters that
like look up
accidentally ended up being something.
Yeah, the kind of thing a sensitivity reader would catch.
When you're doing when you're naming things in fantasy, like, and you come up with a cool new name or word, look it up, Google it to make sure you're not hexing.
For real. Google
but one thing I want to talk about also, it's like, I don't think it's a problem to show a technological development that mirrors like a Western European one. Like in Mistborn, it literally, like when we get to Mistborn Era 2, it's literally just 1920s America or like American Wild West. And I think Wild West with Mistborn powers is fucking awesome. But with the Cosmere in a whole, he is given this opportunity of all of these different worlds to show the differences in the way they develop. And the thing is they're all using different tools because they all have different magic available to them, but they're just using different tools to make the same technological developments. Yeah. It's like they're all making cell phones, but one of them's using Stormlight magic and one of them's using Mistborn magic to make cell phones. Like,
I mean, we'll know a little in a couple of months what this sort of Wild West Mistborn world building looks like, but like the Wild West comes out of an extremely specific context in American history, and also it's not as long a period as we think about. It's about a period of like just about 20 years is the Wild West. It's not like this grand sweeping thing where the entire 19th century was the Wild West. So like with that specific context, I do agree with Jack that like getting to that place in genre is cool. But also, I really want to see the work and how the Mistborn gets a frontier that needs cowboys to deal with it.
Yeah, I think there's also something to be said that, yes, only the cowboys were only 20 years, but then it sparked 60 years of the Western as a genre. Yeah, so like, you'll also be playing with that.
But that's an example of cultural technology influencing what we think about, because in terms of cultural technology there, filmmaking is huge. And granted, I know a little bit about Era 2, like that films do exist kind of, but
I'm not
I think it would... Yeah, that's fair. But again, I really want to see, if we're getting to the point where technological advancement has reached that point, I want to see mass-produced art and stuff like that. And it's also sort of like, or art that's supposed to be broadly popular. It's also interesting to me that, like Sanderson being a writer, having such specific views on writing, we get a lot of people talking about books as philosophy and stuff like that, but no one's really no one reads a novel. Like, they exist.
Speaking of technology, the novel is a very recent technological advancement. The novel did not exist before the 1800s.
The novel has existed since the 700 AD. It's just that the modern novel has some key differences. The first modern novel is arguably Don Quixote, which is 1500s. But yes, you are correct that most people's introductions of stories would be plays, which do not follow the same traditions as novels that we think of them today.
Yeah, and I mean, before around the 1850s, the poetry was an extremely normal part of society, and poems were regularly
much more dominant culturally.
Published in the newspapers every single day. everyone was writing each other poems and stuff like that, and like letters, and it was just like a normal way. It's like how we sing songs, like poetry was just like kind of exchanged in that way.
Well, I think that's one of the sort of interesting things of how we've gone a little bit broad here, but the fact that we don't write letters anymore, Jack and I were talking about this, is like, it used to be that everyone who could read and write would have these traditions, or just to keep up with your friends, you would need to practice a skill to keep up with your friends, apart from just being a good friend, which I suppose is a skill that you have to practice. You would have to practice writing. You would have to practice something else. And if you just got good at the craft on some level, I think on some level it gave you a deeper appreciation for the novel, which is why, I mean, before film, it is so much more dominant in the cultural consciousness.
Yeah. The novel as we know it wouldn't have been in a feudal society.
No, but also, it wouldn't shock me if we got something along the lines of Don Quixote. Or, again, the novel in European society wouldn't exist, but I believe the first novel is a Japanese invention.
Yeah, I was specifically talking about English, because I have an English degree and we talked a lot about that.
The Tale of Genji, which is 11th century, so 1,000 years ago. You could make a bunch of claims for what's in English, Don Quixote, La Morte d'Arthur, but it's obviously like highly debated, because again, there are obviously written stories beforehand, but the modern novel is a different thing. But again, I'm interested into the fact that, like, what would a Lethe play look like?
I was actually just about to say that, like, the only form of cultural, like, cultural product we get is, like, paintings, novels, and I think we learn about, like, one specific type of poetry. What Sanderson... Oh, yeah, fashion.
Yep.
Have we gotten plays in any Sanderson book? Like, theater?
Yeah. I thought that the Warbreaker people, they went to a theater. Or did they get
they had performances. I don't know if they were quite like a play.
They were just
I wonder if
I would have to go back and check.
I wonder if there's influenced just by the fact that Brandon Sanderson, like, novels are his life. Like, that's clearly the form of art he is engaged with the most throughout his life.
And again, in that, I would love to see more of that in non-philosophical writing and stuff like that. The other thing I wanted to shout out is David Graeber's The Dawn of Everything, A New History of Humanity, which is a look at... He basically makes the case, it's like, hey, everyone knows the Western view of this already, the Western philosophical canon, and let's stop centering that for a second and actually think about what this looks like. Because John Locke and Thomas Hobbes were often wrong, and their assumptions about, like, the true state of nature were wrong. And that's a pretty good book. It's, I was about to say it's relatively short. It's 600 pages. But as academic books go, that's fine. But it's really accessible as academic works go. It's much more in the line of his book Bullshit Jobs or Debt, where it keeps an academic tone and, like, is extremely well researched, but it doesn't go to the point where a lot of, like, really academic writing is so specific to their field that only someone who is an expert in the field can really parse it.
I was going to say it's interesting that he kind of thought about this work in Alcatraz, because in Alcatraz it's played off as a joke, but he does think about how technology goes backwards in his case, and the main character thinks it's backwards because guns are the primitive inventions, whereas the more advanced inventions are swords and stuff like that because of the magic system that's happening. So, you know, it's like silly and a joke there, but it kind of shows that he maybe starts thinking about these things. I don't know.
One thing that's also going to come up a lot, and Brandon Sanderson is open about, is, I mean, because he started, like, I think when he started college, he started trying to be a chemist or a chemical engineer, and he switched to creative writing. And he's very open about the fact that he himself is very interested in science and technology, but has a very, like, armchair, like he doesn't know it deeply, but he's interested enough that, like, you can read into a lot of his writings. Like, a lot of his, like, writing about technology and magic is informed by a like, at least an amateur understanding of, like, physics and, like, chemistry and all that stuff. Like, he definitely does his research and is interested in, if not being scientifically accurate, evoking scientific accuracy.
And again, I mean, like, his magic system follows real-world physics. It's based on gravity or inertia and all these different things. The other point in Eamon's email that I wanted to respond to is specifically Sanderson's tendency to code race. I think we talk a little bit about this with the Parshendi, but I think that will be an interesting thing to track with the Parshendi. There's a lot of stuff in there where, like, they are a servant race, a slave race, and
Sanderson loves his slave races.
He does. I mean,
Yeah.
and also, like, don't get me wrong. I think a lot of this is supposed to jump out at you as like, oh god, that person's so racist. Holy shit. Like, there's a point where Yasna thinks of the Parshmen as our friends. And I'm like, your slaves are not your friends, my dude. Don't say that shit. Shut the fuck up.
I was just gonna say that at this point, after reading Mistborn, I do trust Sanderson and his slave races. Like, I don't... Like, he hasn't lost... I haven't lost faith in anything that he's... Like, I have faith in him. I don't... You know what I'm saying? Like,
Hell of a lie.
I've seen this story.
We trust Sanderson's slave races.
They're
they're
not going to stay slave
the
races
Parshendi.
forever.
The Parshendi, I think, are going to be the source of so much interesting discussion as we go further into Stormlight. And it's just Way of
I
Kings
keep
is
not
very
wanting
much
to call
the,
them the Parshendi. I keep wanting to call them their real name, but we haven't been introduced.
Oh yeah, we
to
don't
their real
learn
name
what
yet.
the Parshendi call themselves in this book, but we will.
Yeah.
And yeah, the Parshendi are going to be so interesting to talk about. And I forgot how much of Way of Kings is very much like, we're going to set up the humans so you know really well what's going on with the humans. We'll get to the Parshendi later.
Yeah.
Is very much this book. Is there anything else, or are we wrapped up? I'm tempted to
we're
say
wrapped
let's
up.
wrap it up because we recorded for 4 hours yesterday and we're almost at 3 hours today.
Yeah. Oh
Yeah.
Jesus, this is going to be a nightmare to edit. I
believe-
do know that I can probably cut at least 90 minutes down,
well,
just based on what we've done.
but if there is something I can do to like assist, let me know.
We can bring you food. while you
Thanks.
work.
I can come like rub your shoulders, just give you like
Honestly, please. Oh my god. Like, God, I had recently I had a friend over and I had a knot in my back and I was like, this is a weird request. I know. But can you please jump on my back? Just like specifically jump on my shoulders. And she very graciously agreed. But
I have not had a single person touch my back and not go, "Oh my god."
yeah, we have that in common. God, Jesus. Anyway, we need to stop recording.
Yeah.
All right. Grab a book and hit the beach.
Grab a book, hit the beach, do back stretches.
We'll see you next month for Towers of Midnight. Until then, grab a book and hit the beach. A Grain of Sanderson is created by Graham Gilman, Taylor Lane, and Jack McLaughlin. I edit and produce the show. Our logo is by our very talented friend Ven Busby. Our theme music is Goodnight Kiss by Too Mellow off the album Midnight Broadcasts. You can find their work at twomellow.net, that's the number 2, MELLO, and twomellow at bandcamp.com. If you'd like to support the Beachcombers further, you can do that in the following ways. First, please tell your friends about this podcast. Sharing the pod in a Discord, writing a thoughtful post on social media, or otherwise telling your friends really helps us out. You can also support us by following us on social media. Taylor works very hard on our Instagram. Or by buying a book from our bookshop, of which we see a small cut. Both those links are in the episode description. Questions, critiques, encouragement? Please write us an email at agrainofsanderson@gmail.com. Or join our Discord. A link is available in our show notes. Thank you so much for listening.